Alright, let's start with one of the most fascinating figures in ancient philosophy, and I mean that literally. Empedocles wasn't just a philosopher sitting around thinking deep thoughts. This guy was a rock star of the ancient world. Picture Sicily in the 5th century BCE. We're talking around 495 BCE in the city of Acragas, which today we call Agrigento. Empedocles comes from serious money, aristocratic family, all the privileges. But here's what makes him remarkable. He doesn't just philosophize, he's also a physician, healing people. He's a poet, writing in beautiful hexameter verse. And get this, people thought he could perform miracles. The ancient sources describe him as having this almost divine authority, commanding respect both intellectually and spiritually. Now, Aristotle, who wasn't exactly generous with his praise, credited Empedocles as the inventor of rhetoric. That's huge. And Empedocles profoundly influenced Gorgias, one of the greatest sophists. So we're not talking about some obscure thinker here. This is a major player. But here's where it gets weird. And you know I love this part. Empedocles' life was wrapped in legend. The most famous story, he allegedly threw himself into Mount Etna, the volcano, to prove his divine immortality. Now, did that actually happen? We'll come back to that question later. But the fact that this story stuck tells you something about who Empedocles was, or at least who he wanted to be. He fused philosophy with mysticism in a way that was bold, dramatic, and utterly unique. What I want you to understand right from the start is that Empedocles represents something we don't see much in philosophy anymore. This complete integration of rational inquiry, poetic expression, practical healing, and spiritual seeking. He's the last of the great pre-Socratics to write in verse, and there's something profound about that choice. Poetry isn't just decoration for him, it's the only adequate medium for expressing cosmic truth. So keep that in mind as we dive into his philosophy. We're not just looking at abstract theories. We're looking at a worldview that's meant to be lived, felt, experienced, not just understood intellectually. Now we get to Empedocles' first major breakthrough, and this is genuinely revolutionary for its time. Look at what he's proposing here. All of reality, everything you see and touch and experience, is composed of 4 eternal, indestructible elements. He calls them roots, rhizomata in Greek, not elements. That word choice matters. Roots suggest something fundamental, something that grounds everything else, something living and generative. Let's break them down. Earth. This is your solid foundation. Stability, structure, form. Think about everything that endures, that holds its shape, that provides the framework for existence. Air, the invisible breath of life. Movement, change, connection. You can't see it, but it's everywhere, linking all things together. It's what you breathe, what carries sound, what fills the spaces between. Fire, transformative energy. Heat, light, the force that changes everything it touches. This is vitality, the spark of life, the power that makes things happen. Water, fluid essence, adaptability, flow, the medium of life itself. Think about how water takes the shape of its container, how it's essential for all living things, how it dissolves and carries other substances. Now here's what's brilliant about this. Empedocles is synthesizing all the earlier pre-Socratic thinkers. Thales said everything is water, Anaximenes said air. Heraclitus emphasized fire. Xenophanes talked about earth, and everyone was arguing about who was right. Empedocles says, "You're all right, and you're all wrong." It's not that reality reduces to one fundamental substance. Reality is composed of 4 fundamental substances, and they're all equally basic, equally eternal, equally real. None of them is more fundamental than the others. This is pluralism. The idea that ultimate reality is irreducibly multiple. And here's the key philosophical move. These roots never come into being, and they never pass away. They're eternal, permanent, unchanging in themselves. This is crucial because it's going to solve a major problem we'll see in a moment. But wait, you might be thinking, if these elements are eternal and unchanging, how do we get the world of change we actually experience? How do we explain birth, growth, death, transformation? That's the question Empedocles is setting up to answer. The elements themselves don't change, but their combinations? That's a different story entirely. What Empedocles has done here is mark a pioneering step toward what will eventually become atomic theory. the idea of fundamental, indestructible building blocks that combine and recombine to create the diversity of phenomena we observe. He's not there yet. These aren't atoms, they're still qualitatively distinct substances, but he's moving in that direction. And think about the influence. This four-element theory dominated Western science and medicine for over 2,000 years. Medieval alchemy, Renaissance natural philosophy, even early modern chemistry, they're all working within this framework. It wasn't until the development of modern chemistry in the 18th and 19th centuries that we finally moved beyond it. So when you look at this slide, you're not just seeing an ancient theory. You're seeing the foundation of how Western civilization understood the physical world for millennia. That's the power of a good philosophical idea. Okay, now we get to the really interesting part, and this is where Empedocles shows his genius. So we've got these four eternal, unchanging roots. But that creates a problem, right? If they're eternal and unchanging, why isn't the universe just static? Why do things move, combine, separate, grow, decay, live, die? What makes anything happen? Empedocles' answer: love and strife. Two cosmic forces that are just as real and fundamental as the four elements themselves. Love, philia in Greek. This is the unifying force. Love draws the elements together into harmonious combinations. It creates order, beauty, complexity. When love is at work, you get growth, you get life emerging, you get things becoming more integrated, more unified, more whole. Love is attraction, connection, integration. It's what makes the elements want to mix and mingle and create new forms. Strife, nekos. This is the separating force. Strife pulls things apart, dissolves combinations, creates division and fragmentation. When strife dominates, you get decay, conflict, things breaking down into their constituent parts. This is repulsion, separation, dissolution. Strife is what makes combined things want to return to their pure, unmixed state. And here's what's crucial. Neither love nor strife is good or bad, in any simple moral sense. They're both necessary. You need love to create complex forms to bring life into being. But you also need strife to break things down, to return elements to their pure state so they can recombine in new ways. Without strife, everything would eventually congeal into one undifferentiated mass. Without love, nothing would ever come together in the first place. Think about it in terms of your own life. Relationships form. That's love at work. But relationships also end. People go their separate ways. That's strife. Neither is inherently evil. Both are part of the natural rhythm of existence. Now here's where it gets cosmic. Empedocles describes an eternal cycle driven by these two forces. Moments when love completely dominates. Everything is unified into the sphere. A perfect, harmonious, undifferentiated unity. All elements are mixed together in perfect proportion, beautiful but without distinct forms. Then strife enters, pulling things apart, creating separation and differentiation. This is when our world, with its distinct objects and beings, comes into being. Eventually, strife gains the upper hand completely. Everything separates into pure, unmixed elements. Total division. Finally, love returns, beginning the cycle anew. This cycle is eternal. It never began and will never end. It is the fundamental rhythm of reality itself. Why is this philosophically brilliant? Because Empedocles reconciles two seemingly incompatible views that were tearing Greek philosophy apart. Parmenides argued that reality must be one, eternal, and unchanging. Change is impossible. Heraclitus claimed that everything is in constant flux. Change is the only reality. Empedocles says both are right. The elements themselves are eternal and unchanging, Parmenides, but their combinations are constantly changing through love and strife, Heraclitus. The world we experience is therefore both being and becoming. This synthesis anticipates later ideas about opposing forces, Hegelian dialectics, Freud's eros and thanatos, the Chinese yin-yang, showing a deep intuition that reality is governed by a fundamental polarity between uniting and dividing forces. Let me make sure this philosophical breakthrough really lands, because this is the heart of why Empedocles matters. Look at this progression on the slide. You've got Parmenides on one side, Heraclitus on the other, and Empedocles in the middle, but he's not just compromising. He's doing something more sophisticated. Parmenides gave Greek philosophy one of its most rigorous logical arguments. He said, "Look, if something comes into being, it either comes from being or from non-being. If it comes from being, it already existed, so it didn't really come into being. If it comes from non-being, that's impossible. You can't get something from nothing. Therefore, nothing can truly come into being or pass away. Reality must be one, eternal, unchanging. Motion and change are illusions of the senses. This argument is logically tight. It's hard to refute. And it creates a massive problem. It makes the world of our experience and the world of change, motion, birth, death, philosophically illegitimate. It's all just appearance, not reality." Heraclitus took the opposite approach. He said, "Look around you. Everything flows. Everything changes. Fire transforms into air, air into water, water into earth, and back again. You can't step in the same river twice. Because by the time you step again, it's different water and you're a different person. Constant transformation is the fundamental truth of reality. But this creates its own problem. If everything is always changing, what persists? What gives things identity? How can we have knowledge of anything if it's different every moment?" These two views seemed irreconcilable. Greek philosophy was stuck. Enter Empedocles with his elegant solution. The four roots are permanent, but their combinations eternally change through love and strife. Think about what this achieves. It satisfies Parmenides' logical requirement that nothing can come from nothing. The elements never come into being or pass away. They're eternal. Being remains being. Nothing violates the principle that you can't get something from nothing. But it also honors Heraclitus' observation that the world we experience is in constant flux. Things are born, grow, decay, and die. But this isn't the elements themselves changing. It's their combinations changing. When a tree grows, earth, water, air, and fire are combining in new proportions. When it burns, those combinations are dissolving. The elements remain. The mixtures transform. It's like, and I'm using a modern analogy here, but it works. It's like Lego blocks. The blocks themselves are permanent and unchanging. But you can build infinite different structures by combining them in different ways. The structures come and go, but the blocks remain. Or think about it chemically, which is closer to what Empedocles is actually proposing. Water is always H2O. Hydrogen and oxygen atoms don't change their fundamental nature, but they can combine to form water or separate to form hydrogen gas and oxygen gas. The atoms remain, the molecules transform. Empedocles doesn't have our modern atomic theory, but he's working toward something similar. The idea that there are fundamental, unchanging units that combine and recombine to create the diversity of phenomena we observe. And this synthesis, this ability to preserve logical coherence while explaining the dynamic world of experience, this is what makes Empedocles a major figure in the history of philosophy. He's not just proposing a theory about what the world is made of, he's solving a deep conceptual problem about how permanence and change can coexist. This duality, the eternal elements, the changing combinations, becomes foundational for later Greek philosophy. Aristotle will build on it. The atomists will refine it. Even modern physics, in a sense, works with this same basic insight. There are fundamental particles or fields that remain constant, but their configurations create the dynamic, evolving universe we inhabit. So when you look at this slide, you're seeing more than just a historical progression. You're seeing the birth of a way of thinking about reality that's still with us today. The idea that beneath the surface flux, there are stable, unchanging principles, and that change itself follows patterns and laws. That's the revolutionary worldview Empedocles gave us, and it's why 2,500 years later we're still talking about him. Now here's where Empedocles gets really interesting, and where he shows himself to be more than just a natural philosopher. Because he's not content to just explain the physical world. He wants to understand the soul, ethics, how we should live, what happens after death, and this is where his Pythagorean influences come through strongly. Let's start with transmigration of souls, what we might call reincarnation today. Empedocles believed that souls undergo cycles of rebirth, moving through different forms of life. You might be human in one life, an animal in another, even a plant. The soul is on a journey, moving through the cosmic cycle just like the elements themselves combine and separate. But here's what makes this more than just mysticism. It's connected to his physics. Remember love and strife? Well, souls are subject to these same cosmic forces. When you act with love, when you unify, harmonize, connect, you're aligning yourself with the cosmic force of love. When you act with violence, division, hatred, You're aligning with strife, and this has consequences. Real, metaphysical consequences. Empedocles describes souls as fallen divinities. Originally, we were divine beings living in a state of perfect unity under love's dominion. But through acts of violence and bloodshed, through giving in to strife, we fell from that divine state. And now we're trapped in this cycle of reincarnation, moving from body to body, life to life, trying to work our way back to that original divine unity. How long does this take? Empedocles says 30,000 seasons. That's not a quick process. This is a long, arduous journey of purification. And here's where his ethics become concrete and demanding. Vegetarianism as sacred practice. Now you might think, okay, vegetarianism, that's a lifestyle choice. But for Empedocles, this is deadly serious. Listen to how he puts it in his poem Purifications. Will you not cease from this harsh-sounding slaughter? Do you not see that you are devouring one another in the thoughtlessness of your minds? Why is eating meat so serious? Because of transmigration. That animal you're about to kill and eat? That could be your father, your mother, your child from a previous life. The soul that inhabits that body is on the same journey you are. When you kill an animal, you're not just ending a life. You're committing violence against a fellow soul, a being that shares your divine origin and your cosmic destiny. This isn't abstract ethics. This is metaphysics with teeth. If all souls are interconnected, if we're all fragments of the same divine unity trying to return to wholeness, then violence against any living being is violence against yourself, against the cosmos itself. And here's what I find remarkable. Empedocles is connecting his physics, his cosmology, and his ethics into one unified system. The same love that unifies the elements should unify our behavior. The same strife that tears apart physical combinations tears apart the moral and spiritual fabric of reality. He writes in Purifications about the cycles of purification, how through multiple lifetimes, souls gradually cleanse themselves of past transgressions. Each life is an opportunity to learn wisdom, to practice virtue, to align yourself more fully with love rather than strife. You're not just passively waiting to be purified. You're actively working towards spiritual evolution through your choices, your actions, your way of living. Now I want to be clear. This is where Empedocles starts to sound less like a scientist and more like a religious teacher. And that's exactly the point. For him, there's no separation between understanding the physical world and understanding how to live ethically and spiritually. They're all part of the same cosmic truth. This integration, physics, ethics, spirituality, all woven together, this is characteristic of ancient Greek thought before the specialization of knowledge that happens later. And there's something we've lost in that specialization, isn't there? Something about seeing the world as a unified whole, where how you understand reality shapes how you live, and how you live reflects your understanding of reality. Whether or not you buy into reincarnation or vegetarianism as a spiritual practice, there's something profound here about taking ethics seriously, about seeing our treatment of other living beings as having cosmic significance. Empedocles is asking, what if the way you live actually matters at the deepest level of reality? What if your choices ripple through the fabric of existence itself? That's a powerful question. And it's one we're still grappling with today, even if we frame it in different terms. All right, let's bring this back down to earth, literally, and talk about Empedocles' practical contributions to medicine and science. Because this guy wasn't just theorizing in the abstract. He was healing people, conducting what we might call empirical investigations, trying to understand how the body actually works. Empedocles, as founder of Sicilian medicine, this is a big deal. Sicily becomes a major center of medical learning in the ancient world, and Empedocles is the one who establishes that tradition. He's creating a school, training students, developing systematic approaches to healing. And what's revolutionary about his approach is that he's integrating natural philosophy with healing practices. He's not just using folk remedies or religious rituals, though he doesn't entirely abandon those either. He's trying to understand the underlying principles of health and disease based on his theory of the four elements. Think about it. If everything is composed of earth, air, fire, and water in various proportions, then health is a matter of having those elements properly balanced in the body. Disease is imbalance. Too much fire, you have fever and inflammation. Too much water, you have edema and cold diseases. The physician's job is to restore balance. This directly influences Hippocratic thought and the development of humoral medicine. The Hippocratic physicians will develop this into the theory of the four humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, black bile, which corresponds to the four elements. And this becomes the dominant medical paradigm in the Western world for the next 2,000 years. Now you might say, but that's wrong. We know now that disease isn't caused by imbalanced humors. And you're right. But here's what's important. Empedocles is establishing the principle that medicine should be based on natural philosophy, on understanding the fundamental principles of how the body works. That's the scientific impulse. That's what allows medicine to progress beyond pure trial and error. Empedocles also develops early theories of perception. How do we see, hear, smell, taste, touch? His answer? Through what he calls effluences. Objects give off tiny particles that fit into the pores of our sense organs like a key fitting into a lock. When the shapes match, we perceive the object. Is this exactly right? No. But it's a naturalistic, mechanistic explanation of perception. He's trying to explain consciousness and sensation through physical processes. And that's remarkable for the 5th century BCE. He has theories about biological development too. How organisms form, how reproduction works, why offspring resemble parents. Some of his ideas are unconventional by modern standards. He suggests that in the early stages of cosmic formation, random combinations of limbs and organs floated around, and only the viable combinations survived. That sounds unusual until you realize, wait, that's actually a primitive version of natural selection. He's proposing that organisms develop through a process where non-viable forms are eliminated and viable forms persist. Charles Darwin didn't read Empedocles and get the idea for evolution. But there's something here. This notion that the forms we see in nature aren't designed from the beginning, but emerge through a process of trial and error, combination and selection. And here's what I love about Empedocles' approach to medicine. It's holistic. He treats body, mind, and spirit as interconnected aspects of health and well-being. You can't heal the body without addressing the soul. You can't address the soul without considering the body's elemental composition. Physical health, mental clarity, and spiritual purity are all part of the same integrated system. This is something modern medicine is only now rediscovering, the mind-body connection, the importance of lifestyle and meaning and purpose in health outcomes. Empedocles understood this 2,500 years ago, but there's one more thing I want to emphasize: poetry as science. Empedocles writes his natural philosophy and medical theories in elegant hexameter verse, the same meter Homer used for the Iliad and Odyssey. Why? Partly because that's the traditional form for preserving and transmitting important knowledge in ancient Greece. Before widespread literacy, verse is easier to memorize and pass down, but I think there's something deeper. Poetry captures truth in a way that pure prose can't. Poetry works through metaphor, rhythm, emotional resonance. It engages the whole person, not just the analytical mind. And for Empedocles, who sees the cosmos as animated by love and strife, who sees philosophy and spirituality as inseparable, poetry is the appropriate medium. Scientific knowledge for him isn't just facts and theories, it's wisdom. It's a way of seeing the world that transforms how you live. And that kind of knowledge needs poetry to be fully expressed. We've lost something in the modern separation of science and poetry, haven't we? We've gained precision, rigor, testability, but we've lost that sense of science as a holistic vision of reality that speaks to the whole human being. Empedocles reminds us that it doesn't have to be that way. You can be rigorous and poetic. You can be empirical and spiritual. You can investigate nature systematically, while still experiencing wonder and awe at its beauty and complexity. That's the legacy of Empedocles in medicine and science, not just specific theories that were eventually superseded, but a way of approaching knowledge that integrates intellect, emotion, and spirit into a unified quest for understanding. Okay, we need to talk about this, because the story of Empedocles' death is so dramatic, so perfectly symbolic, that it's become inseparable from his philosophy itself. The most famous version, the one that's captured imaginations for over 2 millennia, goes like this. Empedocles, at the height of his powers, convinced of his own divinity, leaps into the crater of Mount Etna. Why? To prove his immortality, to demonstrate that he's transcended ordinary human existence, to transform himself back into the divine being he once was. The volcano consumes him. He's gone, but according to legend, Etna spits out one of his bronze sandals, the only evidence that he was ever there. It's theatrical. It's mythic. It's the kind of death that makes you go, Wait, did that actually happen? And the honest answer is probably not. Ancient sources give us multiple contradictory accounts. Some say he drowned at sea. Others report a carriage accident. Some claim he simply ascended to the heavens, achieving divine status without the need for volcanic dramatics. The Roman poet Horace, writing centuries later, captures the absurdity perfectly. Great Empedocles, that ardent soul, leapt into Etna and was roasted whole. So why does the Etna story persist? Why has it become the story of Empedocles' death? Because it's symbolically perfect. Think about what Mount Etna represents. It's earth, air, fire, and water, all in one place. The mountain itself is earth. The volcanic gases are air. The lava is fire made visible. And deep beneath, water turns to steam, driving the eruptions. Etna is literally a meeting point of all four elements. When Empedocles leaps into the crater, he's not just committing suicide, he's performing his philosophy. He's demonstrating the dissolution of his composite being back into the four roots. He's enacting the cosmic cycle of combination and separation. His body, which was always just a temporary mixture of elements held together by love, is being returned to its fundamental components by the force of strife. And there's something else. Transformation as the ultimate proof. Empedocles taught that nothing truly dies, that the elements are eternal, that what we call death is just recombination. By leaping into Etna, he's not ending his existence, he's transforming it, demonstrating that he understands the true nature of reality so deeply that he's willing to stake his life on it. It's the philosopher who doesn't just teach his philosophy, he lives it and dies it. Now, whether this actually happened is almost beside the point. What matters is that this story has become part of how we understand Empedocles. It's become part of his artistic legacy. From ancient Rome through the Middle Ages, the Renaissance, and into the Romantic era, artists, poets, and writers have been fascinated by this image. The German poet Friedrich Hölderlin wrote a whole play about it. Matthew Arnold wrote a poem. Painters have depicted the moment of the leap. It's become an archetype. The philosopher who takes his ideas so seriously that he's willing to dissolve himself into the cosmos to prove them. And there's something deeply human about this story, isn't there? We want our philosophers to be committed. We want them to mean it. We're suspicious of thinkers who preach one thing and live another. Empedocles, at least in legend, achieves perfect consistency between thought and action, theory and practice, philosophy and life. But here's what I find most interesting. The story works whether it's true or not. If it's true, then Empedocles really did perform the ultimate philosophical act, embodying his teachings in the most dramatic way possible. If it's false, if it's a legend that grew up around him, then it tells us something equally important. That people believed Empedocles was the kind of person who would do this. That his philosophy and his personality were so unified, so intense, so committed, that leaping into a volcano seemed like exactly the kind of thing he'd do. Either way, we learn something about who Empedocles was, or at least who he represented in the ancient imagination. He was the philosopher as prophet, as mystic, as divine being. He wasn't content with halfway measures. He didn't separate his intellectual life from his spiritual life, from his everyday existence. It was all one unified whole. And that volcanic leap, real or imagined, captures something essential about his entire philosophical project. The courage to dissolve boundaries, to embrace transformation, to see death not as an ending, but as a return to the elemental dance of love and strife that constitutes all of reality. You know what? Maybe the historical truth doesn't matter as much as the philosophical truth the story embodies. Sometimes myths tell deeper truths than facts ever could. Let's step back and look at the big picture. What did Empedocles actually accomplish? Why does he matter 2,500 years later? First, he's the last major pre-Socratic to write in verse. After Empedocles, philosophy increasingly becomes a prose enterprise. Plato writes dialogues. Aristotle writes treatises. The poetic dimension of philosophy, that fusion of rational inquiry and aesthetic expression, largely disappears from the mainstream tradition. And we've lost something in that shift. Empedocles represents a moment when philosophy could still be poetry, when understanding the cosmos was inseparable from experiencing wonder at its beauty. His verse isn't just a vehicle for ideas, it's part of how those ideas work. The rhythm, the imagery, the emotional resonance, these aren't decorations. They're essential to what he's trying to communicate. But beyond the form, look at the content. His four-element theory dominated Western science for over 2 millennia. That's not hyperbole. From ancient Greece through medieval Europe, through the Renaissance and into the early modern period, educated people understood the physical world through Empedocles' framework. Alchemists trying to transmute lead into gold were working within an Empedoclean paradigm. They thought if you could manipulate the proportions of earth, air, fire, and water, you could transform one substance into another. Medieval physicians diagnosing disease were using humoral theory, which derives directly from Empedocles' elemental theory. Even early modern chemistry, before we understood atomic structure, was still grappling with Empedocles' basic question. What are the fundamental constituents of matter? It took the development of modern chemistry in the 18th and 19th centuries, Lavoisier, Dalton, Mendeleev, to finally move beyond the four-element framework. And even then, Empedocles wasn't entirely wrong. He was right that there are fundamental, unchanging constituents of matter. He just had the wrong list. But here's what's philosophically more important. Empedocles introduced cosmic dualism as fundamental to reality. The idea that existence is governed by opposing forces, attraction and repulsion, unity and division, love and strife. This becomes a recurring theme throughout Western thought. You see it in Plato's theory of the forms versus the material world. You see it in Christian theology with God and Satan, good and evil. You see it in Hegel's dialectic, thesis, antithesis, synthesis. You see it in Nietzsche's Apollonian and Dionysian principles. You see it in Freud's eros and thanatos, the life drive and death drive. Now, I'm not saying all these thinkers are just copying Empedocles, but there's something about his basic insight, that reality is constituted by the tension between opposing forces, that keeps recurring because it captures something true about how things work. Think about your own experience. Isn't life constantly a dance between coming together and pulling apart? Relationships form and dissolve. Communities unite and fragment. You build something up, it breaks down. You create order, entropy increases. Love brings things together, conflict tears them apart. Empedocles gave us a conceptual framework for understanding this fundamental rhythm of existence. And that framework has proven remarkably durable and adaptable. But there's one more dimension to his legacy that we can't ignore: the bridge between myth and rationality. Empedocles stands at a unique moment in intellectual history. He's rational enough to propose naturalistic explanations for physical phenomena. He develops theories you can test, at least in principle. He uses logical argumentation. But he's also still embedded in a mythic worldview. His cosmic forces aren't just abstract principles, they're divine powers. Love and strife aren't metaphors, they're real entities that act in the world. The soul's journey isn't psychological. It's a literal transmigration through different bodies over thousands of years. And somehow, he holds both dimensions together. He's simultaneously a scientist and a mystic, a rationalist and a prophet, an empirical investigator and a spiritual teacher. Most philosophers after Empedocles choose one side or the other. They go either fully rational or fully mystical. But Empedocles refuses that choice. He insists that you can be both, that maybe you need to be both to fully understand reality. And you know what? In our own time, as we grapple with the limitations of purely mechanistic science, as we recognize that consciousness and meaning and value can't be fully explained by reductionist materialism, maybe we're coming back to something Empedocles understood all along, that reality has both a physical and a spiritual dimension, and any complete worldview has to account for both. His influence extends from the ancient atomists who refined his pluralism, to medieval alchemists who worked within his elemental framework, to Aristotle who built an entire natural philosophy on Empedoclean foundations, to modern discussions of emergence and complexity and the fundamental nature of reality. Not bad for a guy who allegedly jumped into a volcano. Alright, let's bring this all together. What is Empedocles really trying to tell us? What's the core vision at the heart of his philosophy? Look at these 4 points on the slide. They're not separate ideas, they're all aspects of one unified worldview. Eternal elements. Reality dances through endless cycles, driven by love uniting and strife dividing the 4 eternal roots. This isn't just physics. This is a vision of existence itself as fundamentally dynamic, as process rather than static being. The universe isn't a thing, it's an event, a happening, an eternal dance. And notice the word dance. That's not accidental, there's rhythm here, pattern, beauty. The cosmic cycle isn't random chaos, it's ordered, purposeful, even aesthetic. The elements combine and separate, unite and divide, in patterns that repeat eternally. like a dance that never ends, where the same movements recur, but never exactly the same way twice. Unity and duality, change and permanence coexist through cosmic rhythms of separation and reunion, flux and stability. This is the philosophical breakthrough we talked about earlier, but it's more than just a solution to an abstract problem. It's a way of seeing reality that honors both sides of our experience. Yes, things change. You're not the same person you were 10 years ago. Your body has replaced most of its cells. Your thoughts, beliefs, relationships have evolved. Everything flows, just like Heraclitus said. But something persists too. You're still you. There's continuity, identity, something that endures through change. The elements of your being remain constant, even as their configurations transform. Empedocles is telling us we don't have to choose between these perspectives. Reality is both permanent and changing, both stable and dynamic. The tension between them isn't a problem to solve. It's the fundamental structure of existence itself. Living cosmos. His philosophy reveals the world as a living, conscious whole, interconnected, purposeful, and sacred. This is huge. We're not talking about a dead mechanical universe of inert matter bouncing around according to blind laws. We're talking about a cosmos that's alive, animated by love and strife, which are not just forces but something closer to cosmic consciousness. When Empedocles says love brings things together, he means it literally. Love isn't just a metaphor for attraction. It's a real power that acts in the world, that has intentions, that moves toward unity and harmony. Same with strife. It's not just metaphorical conflict, it's an actual cosmic force that seeks separation and dissolution. And if the cosmos itself is alive, conscious, purposeful, then everything in it participates in that life, that consciousness, that purpose. You're not a separate observer looking at a dead universe. You're a participant in a living whole. You're the cosmos becoming conscious of itself. This is why Empedocles can move so seamlessly between physics and ethics, between natural philosophy and spiritual teaching. Because for him, they're not separate domains. The same principles that govern the elements govern your soul. The same forces that create and destroy physical forms create and destroy moral and spiritual states. Ethical vision, Empedocles challenges us to recognize the spiritual and moral dimensions woven into existence itself. This is where it all comes together. If the cosmos is a living whole animated by love and strife, if your soul is a fragment of divine being on a journey through multiple lifetimes, if all living things share the same fundamental nature, then how you act matters at the deepest possible level. When you commit violence, you're not just harming another being. You're aligning yourself with strife, the cosmic force of division and destruction. You're working against the unifying power of love. You're delaying your own return to divine unity. When you act with compassion, with care for other living beings, when you practice vegetarianism not just as a diet, but as a spiritual discipline, you're aligning yourself with love. You're participating in the cosmic movement toward unity and harmony. You're accelerating your journey back to the divine source. This isn't morality as arbitrary rules imposed from outside. This is ethics as recognition of how reality actually works. You should act with love because love is a fundamental cosmic force, and aligning with it means aligning with the deepest truth of existence. Now here's what I want you to really understand. Empedocles invites us to see ourselves not as separate observers but as participants in the eternal cosmic dance. You are not standing outside the universe looking in. You are the universe. Your body is earth, air, fire, and water temporarily held together by love. Your thoughts and emotions are movements of these elements through your consciousness. Your choices either strengthen love's unifying power or strife's separating force. When you die, you don't cease to exist. You return to the elemental dance, your components separating to recombine in new forms. And your soul? It continues its journey, moving through the cosmic cycle, learning, evolving, purifying itself until it can return to that original state of divine unity. This is a worldview that's both scientific and spiritual, both rational and mystical, both physical and ethical. It refuses to separate what we've spent the last few centuries trying to keep apart. Matter and spirit, fact and value, is and ought. And maybe, just maybe, that integration is exactly what we need right now. We've gotten very good at analyzing the world into separate parts, at specializing, at dividing knowledge into distinct domains. But we've lost the sense of wholeness, of interconnection, of participation in something larger than ourselves. Empedocles reminds us that the universe is one living, conscious, purposeful whole, and we are not separate from it. We are it, experiencing itself, knowing itself, transforming itself through the eternal dance of love and strife. That's not just philosophy. That's a way of being in the world. That's a vision of existence that could change how you live every moment of your life.